Assalamu alaikum. My name is Camila Rashad. I am the founder and president of Muslim Wellness Foundation. It is an organization that is dedicated to um, exploring mental health, addiction, and trauma in the American Muslim community, and also promoting health and healing and well-being and conversations through dialogue, education, and training, so that American Muslims specifically can get the resources and support that they need in order to be well. And we think about wellness in a holistic manner. So psychologically, emotionally, mentally, what are those strategies and support systems, services that are necessary in order for American Muslims to live full and productive lives, and understanding the context in which we are trying to do so. So thank you for joining this online forum. Again, my name is Camila Rashad. I'm the founder and president of Muslim Wellness Foundation. On this forum with me is Imam Nadim Ali. He is an Atlanta-based therapist and Imam of Community Masjid of Atlanta. He is a licensed professional counselor and has explored sort of counseling also through a holistic lens, incorporating Tai Chi and techniques to manage stress as part of his practice. And our purpose today with this online forum is to address specifically the emotional impact of the devastating news that has unfolded regarding the family of Imam Siraj Wahhaj and the children that have been involved in these unfortunate circumstances. We acknowledge as Muslim Wellness Foundation, as a community, that many people are reeling, feeling everything ranging from shock to disbelief to anger and sadness. And we want to spend some time thinking about what are those ways that we can cope with the trauma and the grief that we may be feeling. And we're also going to explain what those terms mean. But we also want to spend some time answering your questions and your comments, some of your thoughts and feelings about what has occurred, but focus specifically on the impact it has had on you as an individual. So one of the goals that we hope that we can reach through this online dialogue is to provide some information and resources and support for those who are really struggling at this most painful and difficult time. Our agenda, so to speak, for today is to establish also some guiding principles for that conversation, so that we all can manage our expectations and understand what this space is going to provide, inshallah, God willing. Imam Nadim is going to provide an overview of grief and what that concept means, how it may sort of show up and manifest in different individuals. I'm going to provide some definitions and context for trauma and what that means, sort of trauma with a little t or a big T. And then we're also going to provide some resources regarding self-care and coping strategies. And hopefully Imam Nadim will be able to lead us through a sort of a guided meditation or an example of some exercises that we can begin to use, especially in those moments of acute stress and anxiety. And then we're going to leave some time open for questions. And so if you have a question, and I'll put this out there now and periodically throughout the broadcast, you can send an email to info@muslimwellness.com. You can tweet at us at MWF National on Twitter. You can also submit questions via our Facebook page or Facebook event page. So we definitely want to hear from you. We want this to be an opportunity for people to ask those questions or explore some of those feelings that they have not been able to explore. And, you know, inshallah, this will be of benefit for all of those who are listening and joining in and seeking support. So again, joining me in this forum is Imam Nadim Ali. who's a licensed professional counselor based in Atlanta, also the Imam of Community Masjid of Atlanta. And I'm going to invite him at this time to open us up in dua, just in prayer, to frame, and help guide our intentions for this time, and to hopefully set some of our minds at ease as we begin to have this necessary, but also at times difficult discussion. So Imam Nadim.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. We ask Allah to guide our hearts and to guide our tongues. Ameen.
Ameen. And before we begin, I just want to acknowledge a few things that I think is important for us to consider as we begin this conversation around trauma and grief, and how to cope with some of the mix and the range of emotions that we may be experiencing as a result of the news that's unfolding regarding the Wahhaj family. One, I want to encourage everyone to think about their own capacity and limitations as far as exploring some of their feelings and thoughts about this tragedy. And what I mean by that is, if you find yourself becoming agitated or upset, feeling really disturbed, I encourage you to first take a deep breath, something that we often forget to do, but also to give yourself permission to really fully feel all of those things without judgment, and make dua, make prayer, that Allah answers the prayers of people who are seeking sincerely to connect with Him, and He is our greatest source of mercy. So we don't want to forget that in this conversation. And so if you find that, perhaps your heart is racing, or you're just starting to feel like a little angry or perhaps anxious, that's normal. But we want to be aware of what's happening in our bodies as we have this conversation. Secondly, we want to emphasize that the purpose of this dialogue is to talk about the emotional impact of the news, of the trauma, as we try to wrestle with understanding the events that are occurring, and the impact that it's having on us. This is not a forum. I repeat, this is not a forum to sort of litigate the details of the case as they unfold, to engage in any finger pointing or disparaging of any member of the family. That is counterproductive, is not healthy at this time, nor is it at any point healthy to sort of engage in a wild speculation, or finger pointing and blaming, because there are people who are in pain and hurting, and really want a space to kind of explore what all of that means. And because this is perhaps relatively new for some, and for others, this has sort of been a months sort of unfolding. There's also some anxiety and feelings related to that. So again, our intention is to provide some information, some support, some resources that can be helpful in helping people manage their emotions, as we all sort of grapple with the meaning of the tragedy in our own lives, but also the impact in the community. Imam Nadim, are there any other sort of points that you would want folks listening to kind of bear in mind as we move forward in this conversation?
I think the main thing is for us to recognize that all of us bring something to the table whenever we experience a grief, a loss, or trauma. And I call it the bucket in ocean. Had a bucket full of issues prior to a trauma, then we are able to bounce back. We have a little bit more resilience. If there's an ocean full of issues in your life, then you will react differently differently than a person who has not had a lot of issues. It's similar to war veterans who suffer loss. And the research shows that based on their pre-trauma or pre-loss, it determines on how. And what I want to talk about is just basically recognizing grief. Grief is any loss, and as for Muslims, we experience a loss, and again, we have to think of the young brother who has possibly lost his life. And so what we have to do is also make dua, for those who have lost. And that's the Siraj family, as well as the family of the young brother Abdul. And what we have to understand is that we can grow from a loss. And what we have to look at, what are the losses? Losses that we have in life's journey. For instance, you lose something, whether it's a person, whether it's a situation, even if we move, we have to grieve. And a lot of times, specifically when we lose a relationship, we do not grieve properly. We wish things that had turned out differently whenever we had a loss. And so these are some of the things that we have to look at. Like, for instance, if we lost some things, it impacts our dreams, it impacts our time and energy. We're consumed with that loss. It impacts our self-esteem. It impacts, our relationships and friendships and enthusiasm for life, for as human beings. Because again, although we're Muslims, and even though when we experience a loss, we might say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilahi raji'un. From Allah, we come surely to Allah is our return, and we do the janazah. We have to recognize the times that it takes time for people to heal from any major loss, and even the loss of innocence, because as the Muslim community, a lot of times we feel, and rightfully so, we feel as though we're under attack. And when any incident like this, it's like a form of re-traumatization. And so some of the things that happen to us as a result of grieving, we go into anger, guilt and blame, shock, sadness, confusion, and we have some intense emotions. And as Sister Camilla stated earlier, that it impacts our physical self, it impacts our spiritual self, it impacts our mental selves, and we ask the question, how long does it take to deal with a loss? Again, there is no time limit for grief. The stages, are not necessarily progressive. The lady who identified the stages of grief, her name was Annie Kubler-Ross, who basically interviewed thousands of people who had losses, deaths through death, through homes, just several different losses. And so she identified the different stages of grief that we're so familiar with. Again, it's a process. It's not just an event. And again, there's no perfect way to grieve. When people say you get over it, no, that's not healthy. It's not helpful. I look, no, as men, we tend to stuff. And I call it, in many instances, emotional constipation. We don't vent for the most part. So crying is healthy, screaming is healthy. Wanting to be held, or deciding, not to let anyone in is also some way that grief might impact us. Shutting down is an unhealthy way of dealing with grief. So we have to basically find a healthy way to deal with the aspect of grief. Things that, we may do to avoid doing the grief work are intellectualizing, just basically staying in your head, replacing it, just trying to, get over it by replacing it or sublimating it with something else without feelings, just basically engaging in ruminating thoughts, stuffing, as I mentioned earlier, blaming, isolating, complaining, distracting yourself with other compulsive behaviors. When we have, for instance, addictions and other types of afflictions, we can put a loss can put us on a relapse progression, over controlling people, places, and things, sleeping, having forms of depression, fantasizing. Grieving, again, is one of the biggest things that you'll do. And again, when you grieve the loss, of someone, you may be grieving for years of unfelt, carried, or stored feelings. I remember working with a lady who basically, she stopped drinking alcohol, and this was in about 97. And she recognized that she had been self-medicating with alcohol because she lost her fiance in World War II. So you're talking about well over 50 years. And so when we look at the recovery process for grief, we have to recognize denial. Again, denial that the situation exists, refusing to believe. No emotional acceptance, sincere delusions or defensiveness. Problem is external to self. And confusion. Denial can take many different forms. And then we look at anger as another phase of the grief. No acceptance, hostility, power struggles, hopelessness, self-sabotaging, unmanageability. And again, this stage may give you energy to work on other feelings. Anger is just an emotion. It's emotional energy. Bargaining. Is that a question or comment?
Yes, Imam Nadim, would you be able to sort of offer an example? Because one of the questions that people often have, and the reason that they feel very hesitant to even start to share or disclose what they're feeling is, well, what if I do open up, right? And I start to talk, and then I'm completely undone. I fall apart, right? What would you say to someone who's perhaps grown up in a family or a community that really discourages individuals from talking about what's happening in their family, discourages people from talking about what is happening for them emotionally. And so now, we're sitting on a forum and saying, no, it's healthy to share. It's healthy to explore your emotions. And I can see someone saying, well, one, I've never done that before. And two, what if I start and I just completely fall apart? What would you say to that person who's fearful in that way?
Of course, as a therapist, we always encourage people to not only seek therapy, but the main thing is to have a safe place. A lot of times people don't feel comfortable going to a therapist because of the stigma of going into therapy. But having confidants that you can talk to, and if possible, join a support group. And those are one of the things. And even journaling is a way. If a person doesn't feel like sharing in a group, writing your feelings down, writing your emotions down. One of the exercises I give some of my clients is I have them do a feeling check 4 or 5 times a day, early in the morning, in the afternoon, as well as mid-afternoon, in the evening, before you go to bed. How am I feeling, and the thought behind the feeling? Because again, that there's common emotion is anger. And I always say that anger is like a circuit breaker. And you have to say, it's like peeling the onion. What is the core of the anger? And the core of anger is the need to be loved, the need to be appreciated, but to find a safe place to be able to vent. And even if it's journaling, whether you do it writing or online journal, if you are one who is not adverse to therapy, to be able to find a therapist that you're comfortable with, and so that you can share your emotions. Because one of the things, again, that happens is that we can block and stuff. And sometimes, as you mentioned, we start sharing, and then all of a sudden there's this flood of emotions, because the current incident may cause re-traumatization. And re-traumatization is likened to if you're healed, if you have a wound and it develops a scab, and you rip the scab off and you have to start healing all over again. And so a lot of times we heal or we stuff, and then we have something that reminds us of a previous trauma or a previous loss, and then we're reacting, we project onto that as well. So it's important, to basically find a safe place to share. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and for someone who, again, I'm thinking about the ability to share what it is you're feeling, and to do it in a way that you feel safe. I feel like it's a practice. It's almost like a muscle that we have to work. And for some of us, that muscle is kind of weak. We either don't have the spaces or the relationships that allow for us to express what we're feeling, either without judgment, without, someone thinking that we're weak, or that, we just can't handle it. Perhaps we should just sometimes, often, especially in faith communities, not just in the Muslim community, we're taught, just make dua, right? And
pray it away.
pray it away, take all of your problems to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that should be the end of the conversation. And so again, what do you say to the person who says, well, this is what I've been taught and this is what I've seen, and for me to say, I've prayed, I've made salat, I've been really just crying out to Allah, but I need to talk to someone, right? What would you say to that person that feels like, well, does that mean that my communication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is insufficient?
Well, Allah puts people in our lives. You're familiar with the old story about the man who was in the flood, and then the neighbors came to him, and then the helicopter and the boat came to him. Yes. And then when he died and drowned, because he said, I put all my trust in Allah. And he said, I sent the boat and I sent the neighbors. And so Allah works through people. And, yes. and just like with surgeons, the spiritual surgeons will say, I'm just an instrument. I'm just a tool of the Creator. And so you have to take a risk. I always tell my clients, once you take a small risk, and if you get a positive return on it, then it will encourage you to take more risks. And so I think just taking that risk, again, finding a safe place, finding, again, if you don't want to do a therapist, many of the imams, they can give an attentive ear. And the main thing is you have to find a place where your confidentiality is respected. Because one of the things, as you know, as licensed therapists, a part of our license is that, we can't talk about what others have told us because they can sue us. We have to keep insurance in order to protect the confidentiality of our clients. And if you just talk to a best friend or talk to somebody over I don't know if they still have clotheslines, but they have that. They don't give you that protection. So having a licensed therapist that you can trust, and there's a website, psychologytoday.com. You can go in there, put your zip code in, and you can get the profiles of the therapists all over the country. And then there's other, and I'm sure in whatever your city that you can just put, therapists, you can put Muslim therapists. I've had people drive in and fly in to see me because they want to have a Muslim therapist to get a Muslim perspective of their loss, of their pain, of whatever they're suffering from. And so, my advice to people is to begin to take those risks. But for everyone, it's good to journal, but if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't have a space where you can talk to someone. Okay.
And there, I wanted to sort of summarize for those who may have just joined, that you mentioned that there are some common reactions that people may have when they're feeling grief or loss. And some of those initially may be shock, right? Mm-hmm. And for someone who's thinking like, yes, I'm reading the news and it's really tragic, but I don't feel anything. Mm-hmm. That is also a normal response. There's some degree of numbness. You also mentioned that some people are confused, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if we think about the different responses, even that we've seen online, you can identify perhaps where someone is by what they're expressing, right, on social media. Mm-hmm. So some people may be saying, well, this can't possibly have happened. Something, these are all lies. We should not be talking about that. Perhaps that person is somewhat in denial, right, of the circumstances. Like, yes, we don't know all of the details, but there are some things that have emerged, and perhaps that person at that time is not ready to fully accept some of the news that's unfolding. You also mentioned feeling anger. And I think it's anger that I would say for Muslims, sometimes is, there are hadith and sort of, verses that are cited that we should be always calm and patient and not have those sort of more volatile emotions. And I would say specifically for Black Muslims, there's sort of this tradition of, you should be very forgiving, that, turmoil and stoic, yes, very strong. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of how you show that you have backbone, that these things sort of don't get you down. But we do know that it does. There's, one other sort of common reaction that I wanted to point out is for people who find themselves almost like preoccupied continuing to think about it, maybe to refresh their browser, and they're looking for all of the information, the latest sort of, right, the latest news that have come out. Some people may be having really disturbing images, or something that feels close to a nightmare about what has happened. That's also very normal. If you're having difficulty concentrating or focusing, maybe you find yourself sort of like just staring out and your mind wanders, that may also be another sign that you're trying to process what's happening. But I want you, if you can, perhaps elaborate, because I think the way that often men and women are socialized, it is that, women are encouraged to talk, right? They talk to their friends or kind of their close confidants. But you mentioned anger and sort of this emotional constipation. And because the tragedy includes both men and women and children, what sort of signs around the grief would you sort of particularly talk to men about, sort of just recognizing perhaps in themselves or others?
I think the propensity to strike out is, because many of us, probably all over the country, especially in the African American Muslim community, know Imam Siraj. And so when you see these things being said, we get angry. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, that the strong person is not the good wrestler, but the one who can control their anger. So avoiding the propensity to strike out, to react, specifically on social media. And what I would want to encourage is to minimize digesting too much media and social media. Get the facts and move on. Get the facts from reputable sources and then move on. And then maybe if new information comes out, because as you know, news, it repeats itself. It repeats itself. And then all of a sudden you feel your shoulders going up to your ears. You feel your body tensing up, and you start to know, you have to know what your physical signs of anger. And so, again, as you mentioned on the outset, to breathe, to do some self-care, to find a way in which you can, not just forget about the incident, forget about the losses. There's a collective feeling of loss in the Muslim community, specifically in the African American community. And so what we have to learn how to do is, again, give the responsibility to those responsible parties and not basically engage in speculation, not allow yourself to be baited by the trolls on the internet. If you need to shut down your social media, for a little while, I've done that a lot of times, specifically when high stress times in the media. I get the facts, or I might just read the facts and then I'll turn that computer off. And so these are some of the things that we have to look at, because one of the things about grieving is that, for instance, if something was ongoing, like for instance, if a person has a terminal illness, you get an opportunity to pre-grieve. You get a time to say goodbye to that person. And so when you get an immediate shock like the Muslim community has gotten, then we go into those stages of grief. As you said, again, the shock and denial. And then what's the acronym for denial? Don't even know I am lying. And so we have to basically work on, just working through that denial, and again, whatever you need to do to manage your stress and not engage. I know Muslims, for the most part, don't use drugs, right? Y'all don't drink alcohol and don't use drugs, but we use food. Okay, we use other things. We put a lot of time in the computers. And again, those are called process addictions, and we have to avoid relapsing on that. Watching too much television, again, a lot of times religion can be an addiction. There's a book by Leo Booth, when religion is a drug, when God is a drug, because we hide or we scapegoat God in many instances. And so as Muslims, we have to have a healthy understanding of our deen. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he suffered many losses. And again, he kept moving, because the Chinese say stagnant water breeds disease. And so we have to keep moving. The best way is to, continue to engage in your daily activities. Try to, you'll feel a heavy load, but I'm not saying to just avoid any situation, but to try to get as much done as possible and not just sit around and ruminating over these incidents.
One of the things that one I sort of want to would pause right here and to actually do what we're advising folks to do, which is to breathe.
Okay.
And that is something that we often take for granted, but we don't do it deeply and sort of mindfully. So would you be willing to just sort of lead us through, a very brief exercise and,
Yeah.
what does it mean to sort of pause and to notice your breath, to do it mindfully, and to have that sort of be able to sort of bring the temperature, so to speak, down?
Hmm. Yeah. One of the exercises that I do and I teach my clients to do is from the exercise called Qigong. And Qigong is a Chinese word that just means to work energy skillfully. And the process of Qigong breathing is tongue in the roof of the mouth that's behind the top teeth. So it's like a smile. And you're going to be breathing in and out through the nose. And you want to sit up straight. And I'll see if I can put my music that I usually use on. See if you can hear that. And so you want to focus on your stomach rising and falling. And if it helps, close your eyes. Inhale deeply and exhale deeply. And one exercise, and I can send you me doing this. I'll send this and you send it out. This is called lift chi up and let chi down. Raising the hands up, inhale. Lowering the hands nice and slow, exhale. Inhale deeply and exhale deeply. Focus on your stomach rising and falling. And let the thoughts come and go. Relax the shoulders, straighten the back. Balance the book is keeping your head level. Inhale deeply and exhale deeply. Just focus on your stomach rising, falling, and don't let your focus go to any other thought. Treat your thoughts like clouds that float away. And when you come out, what you want to do is interlock the fingers and stretch your hands. Just put the palms above your head. Nice big stretch. Inhale. I call that popping the corn, pop those bones. Inhale. And then lower the hands. Exhale. I just wanted to see, Sister Camilla, did you notice any difference from that brief breathing exercise?
I did. I noticed that every time you said like lower your shoulders, I was like, oh, I didn't notice my shoulders were so tense.
Mm-hmm.
Or
My
just
teacher
to
used to
focus.
call it, yeah, my teacher used to call it your shoulders are pinned to your ears. And that's the stress that we carry around. And that makes the heart work more. See, the more stress, it's like a water hose. If you squeeze a water hose, the water will stop flowing. And so our body is filled with veins, just like miniature water hose. The chi travels through meridians, which are energy channels in the body. So if we're walking around tense, like you remember Yosemite Sam, walking around like Yosemite Sam, tense all the time, then what we're doing is actually we're making our heart work more because it has to work harder to push that blood through the body, and also it makes it makes it hard. It causes impedance of the chi. Because if you look at the word disease, you put a dash after the S, it's disease, out of balance. And so the Chinese concept of illness is a chi imbalance. And so we have to basically learn to, and even when I'm speaking salat, and I know it's no hadith on it, but I do that breathing when I go into ruku and I come up, I do the breathing, and then what you're doing for the chemists out there is you're releasing the serotonin during that breathing process. You're releasing the endorphins. So inhale, come down, give each movement a breath. If you pick up something heavy, inhale. You're harnessing the chi. Because you've heard of stories of old ladies seeing a loved one under a car and don't think, and they lift up a car without even thinking. Because for that second, they've harnessed that chi. And if they had thought to do it, they could never lift that car again. And so, as the Prophet ﷺ said, to seek knowledge even unto China. And so, so we get yoga from India, we get Qigong and Tai Chi from China, we get, the art of dance from Africa. And so we have to go around the world and find out what works so that we can heal our people.
Oh, alhamdulillah. I hope that everyone who's tuned in appreciated that breathing. And there were, I have to be honest, like several times today that I just had to breathe. Like I felt like that was the only thing that I could really do in the moment, because I've shared with people that I've grown up in the community of Masjid At-Taqwa, and so the news definitely hits close to home. But when we're thinking about, well, how do we care for ourselves so that we can be able to provide support and space for others, I think it's that very simple act of breathing that becomes so important, and to do it intentionally. Um, and you also mentioned journaling, as a way of building a practice of self-reflection. So if this trauma is impacting people who perhaps have experienced something really devastating, either recently or even in the past, it's bringing up, it's triggering, right, memories of perhaps an event that was really difficult or unpleasant or abusive. And so there are three questions that I often encourage people to think about as to guide their reflections, sort of restorative questions, and again to keep it focused on the individual, because we're not saying that. What we want to encourage people to do is to really consider the impact it's having on them, on their hearts, on their minds, on their spirits at this time. And so for those who journal or kind of like the act of sort of writing down their thoughts, I would say think about, what were you thinking at the time you found out? Right? Can you recall where you were, what you were feeling? Perhaps maybe you were speechless, right? You felt like your heart stopped, or for a moment, just you were paralyzed, just in disbelief. What have you thought about since you found out? Perhaps that'll give folks a way to think about what some of their own reactions are or have been. Perhaps you moved from confusion to sadness to anger, right? And that can happen perhaps in the span of 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't mean a
Less.
day or less,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe
Mm-hmm.
confusion, and then something really makes you upset and sad. And I also encourage people to think. So first, what were you thinking at the time you found out? What have you thought about since? What has been the hardest thing for you? Right. And I think that may be the most challenging question, because it is sort of forcing people to go a bit deeper. And so if you are, like you said, deflecting or kind of intellectualizing, and saying, well, I have to wait for all the facts, and perhaps that will sort of clear things up. We shouldn't jump to conclusions, and all of those things on the face of it are appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's sort of preventing an introspection or an acknowledgement of some of the other emotions, then perhaps that's a defense, and,
Mm-hmm.
and a way of sort of avoiding the feeling. So again, the three questions are: what were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? And what has been the hardest thing for you? Um, is there another question that perhaps you would add to someone who really wants to either journal or is more comfortable sort of writing down their feelings?
How can I empathize with the people who have had that loss? Because although many of us are parents, and so just the children who were found in that condition, we empathize with that, and so a lot of that causes sadness, and we have to acknowledge our sadness, and so I think just asking the question, just self, how do I relate to this? What is my level of empathy? And then also the journaling is a form of catharsis. It's a form of purging. It's a form of getting it out. And that's healthy. And it's just not, because a lot of times we hold on to our emotions as a means of possibly impeding the grief, impeding the act of grieving. And so we hold on, just like we have people who might have lost a child, and 20 years later they still have the crib, and they haven't moved from that spot emotionally. And so we have to allow ourselves to do the work of grief work. And as African Americans, for many instances, many years, we haven't been allowed to be human beings. I always tell people we're the newest people on the planet. We weren't allowed to get angry. We weren't allowed to. My mother witnessed the lynching. My daughter just went to the lynching museum and found one of what they did with the genealogy for my family, and she found one of the names that's in my family tree in the lynching museum. And so we haven't had the benefit of therapy. The Europeans have had well over 100 years of therapy. We've probably just been engaging in therapy probably the last 20 to 30 years for the most part. If I would say 40, if for those of us who have had those types of resources. And so this is something new. We've used the Masjid, we've used the church, and many of our religious leaders, many instances, are not equipped to handle the psychological aspects of it. You can get the spiritual food there, but we have to basically also seek the professionals like ourselves and be able to get the needs met from a psychological perspective, because we start to feel guilty, because if we knew any of the people involved, we say, well, what could I have done? That's the bargaining stage of grief. What could I have done differently? What could I have done to stop this? Why didn't I see any of the signs? And you start asking yourself. And so, we will all go through this. And so we have to identify what our emotions are. And I'm going to send you a feeling wheel as well. And you post that, and that can, because again, a lot of us, especially us men, my brother told me not to use John Wayne because I'm old, but I guess Wesley Snipes, we want to carry that. We don't get sad, we don't cry, men don't cry, but we get all those messages. And so we need to feel, FEEL and not feel FILL.
Alhamdulillah. I'm hoping again that people understand that this is not sort of a judgment against anyone, that, if you've used sort of unhealthy ways of coping, that is not to blame anyone. I mean, I always say people do the best they can with what they have. And so if you're able to get better resources and better information, then the hope is that it will contribute to a healthy sort of expansion of what's possible. And you mentioned several sort of unhealthy ways of coping. So you said that process time or filling with almost as a way to distract from the feelings. I think in addition to the sort of time perhaps that people are maybe zoning out a bit, it could also be just recognizing when you're feeling really irritable, and perhaps you're yelling at a child or maybe your partner, or you're really kind of short-tempered. Sometimes it's a matter of just pausing and saying like, whoa, that really wasn't meant for you. But I'm just feeling really irritable. And I'll kind of publicly, my husband probably won't let me live it down, but early this morning, I was just feeling impatient. I was feeling irritable. I think he was sort of playing some little bit of music on his phone, and I was like, can you turn that down? And it was because I had to realize, again, my shoulders were up to my ears, that I was trying to, kind of go through my own process of trying to wrap my mind around it. And so it was coming out in those sort of negative ways. So I apologize, Qasim.
You were acting out. You were acting out.
I was acting out. The Imam said it. But, I think it's important to recognize, like, what are some of our sort of default unhealthy strategies, but also what are some of the things that we do well, and perhaps we need to expand on those things. I would also say that withdrawing from people, from relationships, there's a difference between wanting some quiet time alone to sort of think about, what you're feeling, some of the things that you're thinking about, But then if it starts to become a pattern where you're isolating, withdrawing from people, that you're not returning anyone's calls, perhaps there are some folks that are concerned, then that may also be a negative way of coping. So I also have what's called a self-care starter kit. Excellent resource for folks, and inshallah we're going to send all of this information, some of the things that we've suggested, in summary after the broadcast. But what would you say are some I always have this conversation with either friends or my students about sort of self-care being this act and not a process or practice. And so there are some of us, again, if you're grew up in certain communities where perhaps if you even say self-care, that sounds like, perhaps that's just what white people do. I'll just be honest, that it's self-indulgent, that it's selfish. What are some of those very simple kind of acts of self-care that people can engage in that helps to almost like reset, or get them sort of in balance when they're feeling stressed?
And just like you mentioned, sometimes people will avoid loved ones, avoid people who are usually close to them. And I feel there's a difference between loneliness and being alone. And so loneliness is a condition. You can be in a sellout, I guess I would say Sixers game or Hawks game, and feel lonely. But alone is a choice. And so to basically, recognize I may need some time to myself, but not take too much time. Because the thing with the grief is that if you grieve too long, then your body can produce chemicals that can basically trigger if you have a propensity for depression. And so it's important to, first of all, recognize that there's some sadness there, and also to be able to take the time that you need, do the work, again, whether it's talking, whether it's, maybe, walking, exercise, whatever you need, if you can get to the water, or if you like to maybe just walk in the woods, just find a quiet, safe space for you. Reading the spiritual literature, reading Quran, listening to Quran while you're driving, maybe like say, turning that radio off, because again, like in the 12-step program, they talk about it's a selfish program. And I always say, no, it's self-care. It's self-care program. In other words, that's putting yourself first. Like when you get in the airplane, what do they tell you? Put the mask on yourself first. And what they mean by doing that is if you put the mask on yourself first, you're in a better position to help someone else. But if you're just helping somebody else and turning blue, that's not helpful. So it's about self-care, and having self-care is not being selfish. Even the Prophet ﷺ says, even about charity, he said you give charity to yourself first, then your family, and then those outside of your family. So he emphasized self-care as well, taking care of yourself, sleeping right, eating right, and not just, because again, specifically if you have been diagnosed with something like a bipolar or have generalized anxiety disorder, depression, you have to, if you're on a medication regimen, you can, again, forget to take your medicine. You can basically start to ruminate over that and just, and pour yourself into a manic phase or a depressive phase. And so, and also to remember, what's the old acronym to talk about HALT? Don't get too hungry, don't get too angry, don't get too lonely, don't get too tired. HALT. When you start to see yourself like you were snapping on your husband earlier, you have to halt. What's going on? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? And so we have to, and sometimes I will be rushing and doing 1,000 things, and I have to stop myself and say, okay, I got to get some food in me. I gotta, get me some water. I got to, do something. I got to go call somebody, get in touch with somebody, start to connect with people, because we all need people. We all need, we have that. We're communal people. We're human beings, and also being Muslims, as Allah says in the Quran, guide us on the straight path. He doesn't say guide me on the straight path. So Islam is designed to practice as a community, and this trauma itself has impacted the community. And as the Prophet ﷺ says that when one part of the body hurts, the whole body hurts. It's just like if my toe hurts, it's going to impact the whole body, the whole organism. And so we're part of the African-American organism. And so this trauma has impacted us deeply.
Yes. And before I'll see if we have any questions that were submitted either through social media or through the Facebook page or email. But one of the, I think sometimes people are also hesitant to use the word trauma because they're thinking that it has to be something sort of catastrophic, like there has to be an earthquake or a mass shooting in order to consider something traumatic. But really the definition of trauma looks at something that happens unexpectedly, that we were unprepared for, we felt powerless to prevent it, right? And so given how broad that definition is, something that may be traumatic for me may not be traumatic for someone else. And so if these things happen, especially when there's a sudden loss like this, and that it's complicated, that there are still information and details that are unfolding, and quite honestly, unfolding in the context of an environment that is hostile to Muslims, that's hostile to Black people. And so we're trying to recognize what we're feeling, but we're feeling things in a context that is also pretty challenging and hostile. So it's more complicated than simply, recognizing what's happening. And so the trauma, sometimes people say with a small t, and those symptoms of trauma can include, as we've been mentioning, just physical. That maybe you can't sleep, but you have difficulty concentrating, you feel on edge, and sometimes it's often people find it easier to talk about the physical symptoms, right? That, oh, I have such a headache, my head is pounding, I haven't
my
really
blood pressure up.
Yes, my pressure's
That's the
up.
Black folk thing. My blood pressure up. Boy, you making my blood pressure rise.
Right. And so it's, again, that's a way of, yes, you're recognizing sort of the physical impact, but it can be a convenient way of ignoring the emotional. So some of the emotional, psychological signs, again, are the anger, irritability, the mood swings, feeling hopeless, feeling like this is just so devastating. And for some, it impacts their degree of iman or faith. Like how could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow this to happen?
Right.
Such a tragedy.
Scapegoat Allah. Right.
And so it again, if we're thinking holistically, it's the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. It could be some difficulty even envisioning a better future, right? And for some, that may be they can't go there yet. They can't think about, how can we grow from this experience? What can we learn from it? How can we be better as a community because of it? They may not be at that step, of being able to answer and consider those questions. So there may be a sense of just hopelessness or despair or feeling disconnected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason that we're trying to provide sort of a range of all of these symptoms is because each individual is different. Each moment and perhaps day is different. But a lot of this is normal. And part of the practice is recognizing, the practice of mindfulness is recognizing that these thoughts and feelings occur without judgment, right? And when I say without judgment, it's sort of emphasizing that it means that sometimes people will say like, man, I'm so upset, but I know I shouldn't be angry. And
Albert Ellis says that's called shooting all over yourself.
Yes. And so, you're having this sort of inner dialogue that basically is negating your own humanity, right? I shouldn't be angry. I shouldn't be this upset. I should be focused on something else. Perhaps I wasn't close to this family. So why am I feeling so hurt about it, right? And so perhaps just practicing even for 20 seconds, right? Allowing the thoughts that come and, like you said, letting it float away, right? We don't have to attach onto it. We don't have to evaluate it or assess why and when and how, but letting it go. My last question, or one of my last questions for you, Imam Nadim, is for those who may be struggling with their own sort of either family trauma or mental health issue, and this tragedy sort of exacerbates that, what are some like specific recommendations or advice would you have for someone who already feels vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either emotionally or even physically, and are struggling to cope right now?
And if you have a diagnosis already and you already have a relationship with the therapist, to try to get, if you're seeing them, whether it's on a biweekly or monthly basis, maybe you might need to just, make an appointment with that therapist. And also, if a person has not, if they're taking medicine and they've not had their medicine adjusted in a while, to be able to do have the doctor check and make sure the medicine is working, for you. Support groups, there's groups like Emotions Anonymous and Grief Share is a group that I sent you some information on. The Grief Share, they're all over the country where they have support groups for people who have experienced losses. But the main thing is, if you know your symptoms, specific, some people have seasons. Some people have depressive seasons in the summer, and they have manic seasons in the winter. And so, if your mania is starting to increase, because some of the times we used to do groups say, what is the level of your mania? If your mania is typically at a 3 or 4, and you're feeling it down at a 6 or 7, then I would get a walk-in appointment, or see if your therapist can see you, so that you can get you talked down, or let go talk to your to whoever regulates your medication. So it's important to know yourself. The depression. If you're starting to have self-harm thoughts, you have tons of crisis line, 24-hour crisis line. So maybe I think we can put some national numbers on, if it's not already on the line. To call, and we have a local number of GCAL, Georgia Crisis and Access Line, here in Atlanta, in the Georgia area, where people can call, and they have what they call a mobile assessment team. Or if you're starting to feel you're just out of control, or if a person is dealing with schizophrenia and starting to hear voices and starting to see hallucinations, to go to the nearest emergency room, have someone take you there. So these are some of the things that you have to learn to manage your illness. Just like if a person has any illness, whether it's cancer or hypertension or heart disease, you have to basically engage in that word again, self-care, on that level, because mental health and physical health are the same. We have to manage them the same. There's always been a stigma associated with mental health, but we don't have a stigma with high blood pressure. Like, I've had doctors say that people would rather say they have high blood pressure than to say they're suffering from depression. And I've had one doctor actually prescribed the antidepressants to a person who said they only had high blood pressure, and they came back next day, oh, my blood pressure down now, and they were dealing with depression. So we have to come out of the woods of denial and be able to manage if we have these symptoms. And a lot of these illnesses that we're talking about, because the Kufi and the Kimar does not erase our genealogy. And I hope you understand, the Kufi and the Kimar does not erase the fact that alcoholism, compulsivity, bipolar, schizophrenia, and depression, these can be you can be genetically predisposed for these illnesses. And you can have people who would just have an automobile accident, and then all of a sudden they have symptoms of certain mental illnesses. And so, just like the body can get sick, the brain can get sick.
That's right. And before I forget, I want to offer that resource now while we're on the broadcast, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It is 24/7, it's free, it's confidential support for people in distress, for prevention and crisis resources. So perhaps, you don't have someone close to you or in your life, or access to that person that you feel would be able to provide support in that moment, that you're feeling especially vulnerable, thinking about harming yourself. That number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can Google that. Again, it's free, it's confidential, it's 24/7. And I encourage, again, people to make use of some of these resources and incorporate them into we've given you sort of a lot of different strategies and kind of ways of thinking about caring for yourself. And of those things, you figure out what works best for you. And so if you don't feel comfortable sort of disclosing your vulnerability to someone in your immediate circle or in your life, call a free confidential support line. There's no shame in that. I would encourage it. And perhaps that resource can give you sort of the encouragement that you need to, again, explore other resources as well. It's just a little past 9:30. I'll check in to see if there's any questions that we can answer either through email or on social media. But I want to, again, just emphasize that given the nature of the tragedy, that, as you said at the beginning, there is no limit or time limit on the grief. So if it's, we also have Eid al-Adha is in a few weeks. That may be sort of another kind of milestone, that here we have a holiday that's coming up, and it's usually, very celebratory and joyous. And for some, it may be extremely sad because now here we have a holiday that that we usually look forward to, but we have members of our community that are really mourning. And so there's going to be different, again, reactions and responses to what is occurring. I would, at those times, just be mindful of how much you're consuming of the news on social media. Give yourself permission to take a break from it. And perhaps maybe that break is only 5 minutes, but just, again, in those 5 minutes, do some deep breathing, right? And perhaps you'll think, you know what? I kind of like the way my shoulders feel when they're not up close around my ears. So maybe I want to, now kind of go for a walk, or just, maybe do some stretching, just very simple things that can kind of, again, get your body moving, get your blood circulating in a different way. I think sometimes we think there has to be these grand gestures, right? That, for self-care, I'm going to, take a trip to Puerto Rico, right? Or take a trip to a Caribbean island. And it's like, well, what is the likelihood of that, right? In that moment. But we can do some deep breathing and some guided meditation to help recenter how we're feeling and what we're thinking about. Any other sort of last takeaways or points that you would like to make for those who have tuned in?
Yeah, I just want to make a special appeal to the veterans. There's a lot of veterans in the Muslim community, and there's a special veterans hotline. I know the suicide hotline has a resource for veterans. I think the number is almost similar to 800-273-8255. 800-273-8255. Is that the number you gave?
Let me check one more time.
Yeah, they have
800-273-8255 is the National Suicide Prevention.
Yeah, and they also have a resource for veterans specifically, because if you dealt with one of the Gulf War, Vietnam, Gulf, you're talking about the Gulf War I or II, these types of incidents you can engage in re-traumatization. So to get some help, if you're already with the group in the VA, I think that would be if you haven't been attending your group in a while, it's a good opportunity to just basically attend some of those groups. But also the Muslim Wellness Foundation, we had the resource list for Muslim providers around the country, and that's on the website. But also, I would encourage everyone to ask the leadership of whichever community that you attend to put together a localized resource list, because again, people all the time are getting credentialed, and because a lot of the imams, again, they're not comfortable engaging in therapy. They can give support, but many of them do not feel comfortable giving therapy, and a lot of the imams, and I know in our area, will refer to me and other therapists. And so make sure that you have a resource list for your local community. Put it on the bulletin board so that, again, the needs of the community are being met.
Okay. And to sort of expand on that point, I want to make a special appeal to the leaders of the community, both formally and informal leaders of the community, to also take some time to think about how this news is impacting their own hearts, and if it's leading to feeling either guilt or blame or over-identifying. And that just means that you're sort of seeing yourself, well, what if this had been me, and what if this were my family? So moving not simply into empathy, but to kind of projecting your own sort of situation into these circumstances. My appeal is to the leadership, to imams, to the sister in the community that everybody goes to, to talk about what they're feeling.
And one in every community.
Yes, usually several, kind of like sister aunties, that there also should be a moment of reflection for people who are in the role of caring for others. Please just know that you also are deserving of care. And whether, again, that is, you deciding that you need 15 minutes of uninterrupted time where you're not going to take a call, where you're not going to respond to an email or inbox or a text. Take the time you need, because when you do that, when you're able to replenish and nourish yourself, then you are a better servant. And so it does start with you being able to model for the community what that looks like, what a healthy leader looks like. And at the center of this is also mothers who may be grieving the loss of children. It's going to kind of hit people in different ways. So for the leadership, I would say be mindful of how this is impacting you as an individual. What were you thinking about? What have you thought about since? What has been the hardest thing for you as a leader to navigate some of the difficult emotions? And what support do you have at your disposal in order to be able to really process what is occurring, and how you can really cope effectively as you serve others? Before we go, I want you to lead us in another breathing exercise. I think maybe just selfishly, I want to do that. And then
this one is
yes.
expanding chi. And it's like you visualize you're holding a soap bubble. And if you hold a soap bubble too tight, what happens?
It bursts.
Pops, right?
Yeah.
If you hold it too loosely, what happens? It floats away. And so what you want to do is hold it just right. And that will also force you to loosen those shoulders. So you want to press in and then pull like you're pulling taffy. Inhale on the pull, exhale on the push. Same thing, tongue in the roof of the mouth, breathing in and out through the nose. Inhale, exhale. Inhale and exhale. On the inhalation, you're bringing the chi into the body. On the exhalation, you're sending it throughout the body. Inhale deeply and exhale. Then you place your hands on your knees, eyes closed. Focus again on your stomach rising and falling. Inhale deeply and exhale deeply. Let the thoughts come and go. Breathing in and out through the nose. And again, interlock the fingers, push the palms up above the head. Nice big stretch. Inhale. And then lower the hands slowly. Exhale, as if your arms are pushing the air out of the body. And on the meditation, recommend 15 to 20 minutes of it. I mean, even 5 minutes are beneficial. But if you can do no more than 45 minutes of meditation, as the Prophet ﷺ says that, an hour of meditation can be almost like, a whole night of supererogatory prayers. So the benefit of meditation, he told us, go to get the knowledge in China. Go seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave, even unto China. Why did he say that? I mean, there's just a lot of things that, they've been doing this 7,000 years. So the research has been done. There's hospitals in China. All they do is acupuncture, Tai Chi, and Qigong. You know, and they're dealing with diseases like cancer, dealing with these diseases like high blood pressure, all of that. I have a friend, he's a medical doctor, and we had the same teacher. All he does now, he has a whole clinic for just Qigong. Wrote a book on the concept of Qigong. He does some medical work, but his main practice is Qigong, as a Qigong healer. And so we have to start to utilize these tools to heal our nation, heal our community, inshallah.
Inshallah. The last point that I would make as a resource is Muslim Wellness Foundation. One of our key initiatives is the mental health first aid training. And I remember that you were in our training like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that training is an international research-based curriculum. Basically, it teaches folks how to recognize signs of someone becoming unwell and what you can do to witness and to provide some emotional support when that person is in distress. It is not meant to sort of help you diagnose or be able to evaluate someone, but if someone is in distress, what are some of the strategies that you can use in order to assist them in that moment? And so what we talk about is algae, right? Assess for risk of suicide or harm, to listen non-judgmentally, to give resources and information, to encourage appropriate professional support, and also to encourage support through family and friends, and faith, right? So I call them the 3 Fs: family, faith, and friends. And that is, it gives people the tools and the skills and often the confidence to be able to then to say someone, how are you feeling? How are you doing really? Right? Not sort of this very social kind of surface level question. But if you see someone in distress, now you have the tools to be able to think about how you can assist them in that difficult moment. If you have a question for Muslim Wellness, you can email us at info@muslimwellness.com. You can tweet at us at MWF National, or send us a message through Facebook. We encourage you to reach out, to ask the questions. We want to offer these resources to the community as often as we can, and we try to be responsive to the needs of the community to the best of our ability. I want you to close us in dua, and I want to let everybody else know, all those who are still tuned in with us and who may watch later, that we're going to work to summarize the information that we have provided here into sort of a kind of a brief packet of information, so to speak. So if you missed anything, or if there were some strategies that you really appreciated and you want more information about, we're going to try to compile all of that and offer it online for people to kind of take a look at their leisure and hopefully include some of those practices in their own self-care. So Imam Nadim, if you would close us out in dua.
Inshallah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Verily, by the token of time, mankind is lost, except for those who have faith and join in the mutual teachings of truth with patience and constancy. Ameen.
Ameen. Again, thank you for joining Muslim Wellness Foundation. I am the founder and president, Camila Rashad. Joining me today is Imam Nadim Ali, who is a licensed professional counselor based in Atlanta. You might be getting some requests, Imam, so don't be surprised. But I also...
NadimAli.com if they need
NadimAli.com. There you go.
Keep it simple.
Yes. And finally, the family of Imam Siraj Wahhaj, especially Sister Hakima, the mother of young Abdul Ghani, we want to keep in our thoughts and our prayers, our sincerest du'as, that, may Allah make it easy. This is a really difficult time, and, may he be the source of comfort and compassion and mercy that we truly need in order to get through this as a community. So thank you for joining us. Inshallah, have a good rest of your night. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.